All right, let's do this. All right, hey y'all. This is Simone Samaluka-Radzins, and thank you so much for tuning in. It's kind of weird to hear myself, so
all right, hey y'all.
This is mute it, and I hope that you are going to hear, because today we have a lot to talk about. Many people have asked about kind of, oh, how do I lead a remote team? You know, what can I do? A lot of my employees are asking to work remotely. What's the best way to do it? Well, first and foremost, thank you for listening, because working remotely is something that is so important that you can offer your employees, not only because it is the way of the future. You know, you and I are engaging right now online, but working remotely will lead to more productivity in your workforce if you can do it right. Because the fact is, if your employees are asking to work remotely, they will be happier. And if they're happier, they will be more productive. That is an absolute fact. Now, I know many of you business owners might be a little bit worried about how do you actually, make this all happen. And the point is, it takes time, right? So just like anything, you can take that full jump and say, okay, everybody, let's do remote, or you can be a little bit smart with it and build a roadmap to getting to remote. And so today I wanted to talk to you quickly about how you can build remote teams 101. All right, so let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. All right, there we go. Can you see it? You can see it. I think you can see it well. All right. So we are talking about remote teams 101. Like anything, let's get excited. Let's do this. This is something that you are going to have fun with. This is something that if you and when you can really fully embrace that going remote is going to be for you and your team, taking these steps is going to help you, right? So just get excited. Make sure that you've got a pen, a notebook, all that good stuff, because I'm going to give you some valuable nuggets that you can start implementing into your business today. All right, so first and foremost, I got to give you a spoiler alert. Remote teams have the same problems as non-remote teams. Yep. It's unfortunately the truth, right? So if your team is struggling already with communication, if your team is struggling on meeting deadlines, if your team is feeling disenchanted and you have a high turnover, going remote, if you don't have a roadmap and if you don't have a strategic plan, you might not really see any improvement, right? And so what I want you to realize is that going remote is an advantage that will take time. If you have, it's no magic elixir to any of your problems. If you aren't efficient right now, you might not be efficient tomorrow when you go remote, right? It is how do you take small actionable steps with a roadmap to get there. So I wanted just to dispel this, like remote teams have the same problems as non-remote teams, right? So what that means is we got to focus on those communication problems, the transparency problems, the accountability problems to really make sure that you are going to be successful taking your team remote. So I want us to think about first if this ever feels like your organization, right? So go to the bottom of that slide and you've got something to communicate, a very important thing. Maybe your company is doing a new product launch, or you have to, really implement a new internal control, or it's, there's something that's problematic. Like right now, what's going on, there's, certain things that your company might have to assess critically. And so the question that I pose to you is, you've got something that you need to communicate. How long does it take you to actually get that communicated, right? Because if it's just sending an email and everybody understands it, that's perfect. But what I've noticed is that in many teams, small and large, we go round and round and round and round with ineffective ways of communicating, where at the end, we're like, wait, did this even get communicated? Right? And so when you think about your current workflow and internal communications and how you're working with your team, talk to me about this really quick, right? And leave it in the comments. So you've got something to communicate. Maybe you first send an email, all company announcement, whatever you're communicating. Maybe you're using internal messaging, which is really supposed to replace email. But then maybe you need to have an internal meeting just to follow up on it. But then people are confused and another email is sent out, and then you have to have follow-up meetings. And then you've done enough follow-up meetings, so you think, okay, is this already communicated? Guys, that's a horrible workflow. You don't know if it's communicated. People aren't clear. It's really confusing. And you know what happens? What happens is that you have this mentality when an employee or somebody on the team said, well, nobody told me that. And you know what that leads to? That leads to your customers and your clients saying, I'd like my money back. Now, clearly that's not an overnight thing. That's built upon many layers of communication, many layers of how internal processes work. But that is the ultimate thing, right? Because when you think about your team and when you think about your workforce, no matter where they are, if they're in your internal team of accounting and administration, if they're in HR, if they're in sales, if they're in operations, if they're even in customer service, which is the most important, that can get translated, that miscommunication, if it's pervasive in the entire organization, will be translated to, not tomorrow, but within time, I'd like my money back, right? So the focus, everybody, is really how do we make sure that we are communicating effectively as a team? And so my name is Simone Samaluka-Radzins. I am the founder of Calagia. I'm a CPA, and I've worked with global teams, small teams, and large teams in and outside of Fortune 500, emerging markets, and just plain old entrepreneurs. And so with my experience, I've been able to lead cross-collaborative teams throughout the globe, remotely and non-remotely. And I've built my own practice, my own consulting practice, completely online and completely remote. So I'm very familiar with how to set up remote for success, how to use technology to our advantage and not our disadvantage, and how to get people empowered to use the systems that will help your business and help them make sure that they feel efficient and they are not wasting their time, but they're maximizing their time. So you and make sure that you've got happy employees that are very, very what? Happy, because happy goes along the lines of communication, and communication goes along the lines of happy customers, happy team, happy you, happy me. All right, so I'll be guiding you through a few things in this next 15 to 20 minutes. So make sure, like I said, you got that notebook. So I want to emphasize two things that remote teams really excel in. They excel in communication and they excel in customer experience, right? So when we think about communication, when we break down communication, that's internally all of the communication structures that exist in the company, right? From, bi-weekly meetings to monthly meetings to internal communications on new processes to, product launches, how people work with each other in a team, communication, right? Communication, we'll dive deeper into communication in the next slide. But remote teams also excel in customer experience. Now, customer experience, when you break down customer experience, you can break it down to prospects, but you can also break it down to kind of current customers. And I want us to focus on current customer experience. So current customer experience is the moment that sales have closed and that is going through kind of delivery, right? And so what happens is that a lot of businesses really struggle in their own kind of processes between sales and the delivery handoff. And so when I say delivery handoff, I want to be clear that delivery handoff means operations, right? So, hey, customer, we sold you this, and now, boom, usually sales is like, that's my process in the supply, in the chain of the company, and it's going to get transferred over to operations. But what often happens, and this is usually a root of ineffective accountability, miscommunication, and ineffective processes, is that the customer experience is horrible. Right. And now we see in technology, we see tech companies focused on UX, right? User experience. And so, what I think about when I think about remote teams is that remote teams excel in customer experience, right? And so they're always thinking about the customer first. If it's even in, clearly, if your company is big enough and you have several departments, an accountant might not be thinking about customer experience, but I would say, why isn't that accountant thinking about customer experience? So I want you to remember that remote teams excel in communication and customer experience. So when you break down successful teams, so remember what I talked about at the very beginning, what I was kind of spoiling is that, if you're not a successful team right now, you might still face those same problems being remote. And so when I think about successful teams and I think about successful remote teams, they follow the TACT foundation. And so, I don't know how many of you have been to Pizza Italy, PISA, but if you've seen this leaning tower, we don't want to lean. We want to make sure that the foundation and the core of the team is built very strong so you can scale, right? And so when we think about scale in a business, I want you to just think about scaling the team, right? How effective is the team? How well is the team working together? And so over to the right, we've got this lovely little quadrant, the TACT. It's not a quadrant, actually, a box. And it's really this framework. And what I want you to think about first is, like, when you build a team, what's the number one thing that should be at the foundation? It's trust. Trust, right? That the team trust one another. Now, if the team doesn't trust one another, there's going to be several multi-layered complex issues with how that comes out, right? So if I don't trust the team that I'm directly working with, if I don't trust the manager that I'm directly working with, if I don't trust the CEO of the company, that is going to be seen in so many different layers of the organization, right? And so when companies and company culture is really built upon trust, we see that success transpose almost itself into how the team is actually building, right? And so remember, I'm taking this all back. So we're focusing on this to see how this really intercepts with communication, right? Because communication for a remote team is going to be huge. So I want you to think about this. So how are you really building trust in your team? Does your team feel comfortable right now coming to you or coming to their managers and asking for help? Right? Is the culture that you're creating at your team one of, a shared culture, of trust? Is that happening? Because if it's not happening, what will end up happening is that accountability, communication, and transparency in your organization are going to be very, very hard to really build, right? And so the foundation starts with building trust. Once trust has been built, you can integrate accountability. Accountability comes in many different forms, but at its most simplistic way of thinking about accountability is, hey, you know what? You said you were going to do this. You didn't do it. Right? There's so many different ways that you can communicate that, and the way that you say that, and the way that you act, and the way that you had even set the expectations are all going to change how that person really can feel if they are truly being held accountable and can take that accountability, right? And so again, you can't have accountability without trust. Most organizations suffer from this accountability complex, right? So, if everybody's going to do it, or if there's no clear objective saying, hey, you know what, Simone, I expect that you're going to do that, then without that, nothing could be possibly getting done, right? And so, first we have trust, then we have accountability. Communication is next. So how we communicate in every essence of the word, how do we communicate with the team and the people in the company, right? So internal communication, that slide that I showed you, are things being clear? Are communications only happening when there's something bad to say? What type of verbal or nonverbal communication is happening? And how do we know that everybody has a voice? Moreover, if you have a bigger company and there are multiple departments, how are you ensuring that that tone at the top from the executive level, that C-level corporation, is going to really transcend middle management and then transcend the employees, right? Without an effective communication plan, right, which again can only build upon trust and accountability, then there will be some issues with actually being able to take your team remote. And then last but not least, transparency. Transparency is something that, is often what we like to hide, right? Oh, I don't, I don't want to tell the person this because it might hurt their feelings, or I don't want to say that because I'm afraid what my boss is going to think, right? And so transparency can hinder if the organization, at the top leadership in the organization isn't transparent with what is going on and what is happening, then that transparency will leak and leach into each other crevice or area in the organization, right? And so transparency is 100% necessary to make sure that communication, accountability, and trust really are also working, right? And so as we see all this stuff, it's interesting because they're all kind of directly in that box, but you can shift that box. And I want you to think about this as a Rubik's Cube. That box is always changing, right? And so if one of these things is off, if communication is off in your organization, then trust will definitely fall on the wayside. If accountability isn't really working because people aren't being transparent, those things are interrelated, right? So when you see that box, I want you to imagine that those are the key components in building the foundation, but they're all equally important, right? They don't sit upon one another. They all are interrelated and can be effective, but they do. The first thing that you really need to assess is the trust that's happening in your organization. So I want to focus on, I wanted to give you some ideas of how you can improve your team communication, especially if you're thinking about going remote. So the first and foremost thing is focus on trust and accountability, right? So if you're taking your team remote, you are entering into a new frontier. Let's say you are entering into something that you've never done before, and it's a little bit scary. And so to make sure that you've got the right tools and the right resources, you want to make sure that your full team is on board, right? So focusing on, what kind of trust already is existing in your organization, how can that be a little bit better? And then also from an accountability standpoint, and we'll talk about this in another episode, but from an accountability standpoint, is there accountability in your organization, or is that something that you could work on? Because when you think about remote, most things you're going to need to have an accountability framework to make sure that things are happening and that the process is still continuing, right? So that's the first thing that I want you to assess, is that you want to focus on trust and accountability and how you can make sure that you are giving yourself as close to an A on your trust and accountability as possible. I want you to also reassess the way you are doing meetings. A lot of times what happens with employees is that employees or management or business partners as well, like with ineffective meetings, people get frustrated, people get disengaged, people get confused, and people get behind on their work, right? That's a pretty big problem, right? There's 4 main issues that happen when you are not running effective meetings, right? And so I want you to reassess the way that you are doing meetings. First and foremost, are you setting objectives for each meeting, right? Do people know why they're coming to that meeting and what the end goal of the meeting is? Because if you don't know the end goal of the meeting, there's no purpose of holding the meeting, right? Because you can go talk and talk and talk and talk and have that 1 hour meeting because that's what Google told you to book, but you might not know why. And you could maybe have done that in 10 minutes, right? So the first thing is you really want to make sure that, are you setting objectives for your meeting? Number 2, make sure, I have this rule, like if you don't know why you're here, you shouldn't be here, right? And so with meetings, you want to make sure that everybody that's there needs to be there. It affects their role. It couldn't be communicated otherwise, and they should be speaking, right? So you want to make sure that the important people are at the meeting. And if they're not at that meeting, that you can communicate, what they've missed, right? Because in today's age, we are moving so fast that it's important to make sure that we can streamline our efficiencies. Another thing to think about when you're holding your meetings is one person taking up all the room and taking up all the space. Because if that happens, you're not allowing for this sharing environment. So many people, if you're having a meeting, you're having a collaborative meeting, right? You're not having a discussion. A discussion can be done on a webinar, a discussion can be done in an email, and then you would want to have a follow-up to that, right? To actually talk about what everyone's feedback is. And so when you think about taking up space in a meeting, do you have a system where everybody that is there has an opportunity to participate, and to participate fairly, and to feel that there is a culture of sharing? And then also, are you either meeting too frequently and they're very long meetings, or are you not meeting enough, right? And so a lot of people might be like, well, oh, come on, like all I do is have meetings. Okay, well then maybe you're meeting too frequently. And maybe if you're like, I don't ever get to see my team, I don't know what's going on, well then maybe we need to reassess how the communication is, and if that needs to be kind of reassessed with meetings or reassessed with kind of communication workflow. And so, one thing that you could really kind of think about doing, if you haven't done it already, is introducing the concept of sprints into your meeting workflow, right? So sprints for productivity, stand-ups to understand what's happening, right? So, oh, yesterday I did this, today I'm doing this, and tomorrow these are going to be my kind of priorities, and I have these blockers, right? So a stand-up is a great way where you literally are standing up to make sure that you know what's going on with your team. And it really improves kind of communication workflow, helps build trust, and definitely helps build accountability. Third and foremost, create that environment of a sharing atmosphere, right? So regardless of if it's whatever communication or meeting style there is, but like, how are people feeling that they really can share and be adding value to your organization? Especially when you move to remote, you want to make sure that people have that, and that culture is already there. And then last, definitely not least, is what type of communication tools are you using, right? Are you using a project management software? Are you using a internal communication tool like Slack? How are those being effective, and what are the workflows that you're expecting to see? Sometimes we have so many different methods of communication. So if your company has a WhatsApp group, a text message group, an online internal communication, and has email, your employees and your team's not going to know where to look if there's a priority, right? So making sure that you map out the communication and why people go there and how often they're supposed to go there are all excellent ways to improving team communication. And so what I want you to do after this, and we're almost done, is I want you to perform a SWOT analysis on your communication style as a team, right? And really looking at the foundational structure, right, that we talked about. So I want you to think, while you're doing this SWOT analysis, about what kind of trust, what kind of accountability, what kind of trust, what kind of accountability, what kind of communication, and what kind of trust, what kind of communication, what kind of accountability, and what kind of transparency do you have in your organization, right? And so I want you to use that as the framework to perform this SWOT. And when you perform this SWOT, what I want you to do is I want you to think about breaking down that in your core team and looking at what are the strengths, what are you just killing it at right now? What would be your competitive advantages of your team when you think about this? What are the weaknesses? What are the weaknesses that relate to what's happening in your communication? Is there somebody that's always taking up space in the meetings? Do you guys not have any communication tools, you not have a cohesive strategy. Like there are also weaknesses that are internal to your organization. And then opportunities and threats are external to your organization. What opportunities do you have? I look at the environment. We see that there are so many companies that are excelling in communication and workflow. So that's a huge opportunity that you can integrate into your business. And they're cheap, right? Right now, they're actually pretty inexpensive when you think about it. Video conferencing, project management, the tools now and the software costs are really low. And then there's threats. What threats can really, and those are outside of your organization, so outside of your control. So environmental, political, what type of threats can kind of impact the way that your team communicates? So please perform that SWOT to make sure that you really are kind of assessing what's going on. I call it the 4x4 because I want you to do like literally imagine you've got some Post-its. So Post-its, that's a very pretty Post-it. You post it and you work on, set a timer. 1 minute strength, 1 minute weakness, 1 minute opportunities, 1 minute threats. If you have a team, do this with the team, right? You don't want to do this in a vacuum because then you're only going to know yourself. But if you have a team, this is a great team exercise to really focus on communication and kind of building some unity within. And so I have homework for you, like always. So I want you to work on this. I want you to assess. So after you do that SWOT, I want you to assess the strength of your team using the TACT framework. What are the results of your SWOT and how are you going to, use those results to your advantage? And then what small changes can you make in the current workflow of your meetings? Right. So again, we realize that taking yourself remote is a multifaceted thing, right? You can't just do it overnight. You have to work bit by bit. And so this is a great way where you can start taking action and doing that. So guys, thank you for listening and tuning in, and please leave some comments and make sure you subscribe if you found this helpful. You can check halogia.com for courses and masterminds that can help you in this process. Thank you so much. My name is Simone Zamaluka Radzins, and I will talk to you later.